Hello and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the To-Do List. I am your host, Eric Fisher. This is the show where we talk to the people behind the productivity. This week's interesting because we delve into a little bit of my productivity superhero origin story by talking to somebody who has influenced that a bit and their own superhero origin story. I'm talking with Merlin Mann of 43 Folders and the podcast Back to Work, of which I am a fan. And we talk about his initial interest into productivity that caused the creation of the site 43 Folders. We talk about him coining the term Inbox Zero. Yes, he did that, for better or for worse. We talk about what that meant when he created it and what it has somewhat come to mean, and honestly, what it really is. We also touch on getting things done and David Allen and what the word productivity means and what we kind of wish it meant or what it really should mean. But first, I wanted to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Audible, where you can go to get over 100,000 titles of audiobook in virtually every genre. For example, I'd suggest, if you've never gotten around to reading Getting Things Done by David Allen, go grab the unabridged audio version. It's one of the reasons why I actually read the book in the first place. I did eventually get a hard copy, but I never would have probably gotten around to it had I not decided to grab the audiobook and do the listening of the book in my spare time. Listeners of this podcast can get a free audiobook and a 30-day trial by signing up at audiblepodcast.com/beyond the to-do list. That's audiblepodcast.com/BEYONDTODOLIST. This week is just an awesome episode. I already know. Mostly because of the company. I'm talking with Merlin Mann. Welcome to the show, Merlin.
Hi, Eric. Thank you for having me.
So I know you from, 2005, something like that. First time I ever saw you, you were standing next to Leo Laporte talking about Quicksilver.
Oh, you do look familiar. I know your face from the internet, but I bet we've met.
We may have. I'm not sure, but I'll say
probably
this
because Leo was there, and that's fine. Maybe you want to meet Scott Bourne.
Yeah, that's true too.
Borrow some of his yacht wax.
And Alex Lindsay. Back in the day, the original Mac Break days.
I'll be honest with you, Eric. I was old even then.
So, for people that don't know, Merlin did a bunch of Mac Break stuff with Leo way back when. I honestly don't know when you stopped doing that. There was kind of a little brief period after 43 Folders, before Back to Work, that was kind of almost a black hole for you, where I didn't see much happening.
That's entirely possible.
And probably intentional too.
I think I started the show. Somebody else can remember this better than I, but I think it was around 2005. And then for a variety of reasons, and nominally that my kid was being born,
right,
I took some time off. I mean, that was definitely one of the reasons. But yeah. I needed a Mac break of my own. Nice. And then I came back for a while, and I thought,
Yeah.
Once you've done You Look Nice Today and had Adam Lissagor edit what you do, it's kind of hard to go back.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. I had forgotten there was that whole period there where it was like, oh, this is Merlin being Merlin, not productivity Merlin.
Well, and I don't want to sound, anything but grateful to Leo, because that was the first podcast that I was ever on. I think I may have done my own at that point, but apart from something with Odio in like 1968, I was on Amber MacArthur's show with him one time, the two of them. I'll always be really grateful because Leo, I mean, when I found out how popular that show actually was, it really blew my mind. I'm always really grateful to Leo. He's got a big operation now.
That's one of the things I want to go see. I know a friend of mine actually went out and visited, and it was pretty cool, they said.
He's got a heck of a setup there.
Yeah. For, taking professional podcasting to that level and having, live streaming of what is comparable to what you'd get off, main broadcast stations. He's
100%. Yeah, I think he's been a real, if not, I guess a model and definitely inspiration for a lot of people to realize that, making podcasts can and ideally should be more than just, talking into the built-in mic on your computer and then putting it up a 3-hour podcast.
Yeah.
Although they do get very long. But anyway, that was the first time, huh?
Yeah,
Macworld, one of those really loud panels in Moscone.
So then, obviously, back around then, you were doing 43 folders. I'd love to talk about a little bit. I've heard some of the exploits you've talked about. Your back story or your superhero origin story in terms of how you started with being interested in the whole buzzword of productivity. And part of me loves the word, part of me hates the word. How do you feel about the word?
I think I feel a similar way. I think it's one of those words that, first of all, I agree. In the way that it's in the parlance of our time, it has come to mean so much and so little. One does crave a better word. With that said, I've never personally cottoned to words like effective, because in the way that that's used, it's one of those buzzwords. And like all buzzwords, they start out having a meaning, and then moving into a kind of vertical market where they get used so often to mean so many things that what makes a buzzword is it's been kind of drained of its meaning and becomes something close to what I think it was Orwell calls a thought-terminating cliche. It becomes this thing where we don't even kind of notice we're saying it anymore, but it kind of ends the conversation. And that's the problem with productivity, is because, candidly, it largely in part to people like me using that word so much, like life hacks, it's come to... Sorry, my train's really loud going by. Some people who have followed this stuff and gotten sick of it in particular now think of productivity as this navel-gazing exercise in trying on tools and spending your day thinking about productivity itself. It's become a kind of unproductive, if you like, meditation on itself. To me, productivity, as I would think of it today, and just to underscore, I don't like that word. I don't like to use it, except it does have, if I tag a post productivity, it's because it's about stuff I think is useful rather than X-Men, for example. And I think, as I think of it today, productivity means that, you are having some degree of success in setting aside the things that you don't want to or don't need to be doing in the service of repeatedly making things that you like or that you care about. And, I think that's, for most of us, given any number of factors that I'm happy to talk about, I think that's a difficult ongoing exercise that requires a certain amount of constant refactoring, given how quickly things change nowadays. We don't have a manual that wouldn't need to be updated every month or so on what we need to pay attention to and how we need to spend our time. And I guess for myself, the real value at the middle of that is saying, regardless of what comes along, regardless of what's expected or demanded of me, I want to remain mindful of the things that I actually want to accomplish. And then I want to take very specific steps to ensure that I am keeping my eye on those things, even as a lot of other things come on my radar screen. So hopefully that's enough of an umbrella that it covers things like distraction, procrastination, all of the bugbears of productivity.
Yeah.
Does that help at all? I don't really have a better word for it.
Yeah, I mean, no, that's great.
Without being more specific about what one is saying, I don't have a better word, and that's probably part of the problem,
Yeah. I actually asked the same question of Mike Vardy, who I know you know a little bit. He was at the OmniFocus setup.
Yeah, that was we had a really good time there.
Yeah.
He's a smart guy.
He is, and I just talked to him, and
he used to be a kind of nemesis of mine, and he would be really mean to me, and I never understood why. And then I think we reached some kind of a détente, and we talked about kids, and that always disarms one.
Oh yeah, definitely. You can't be mad at somebody who's holding a baby.
You know what? I'm gonna write that down. That's pretty good.
But I asked him the same question. I said, especially because he's got his new site up that, I don't know, maybe January when he started it, something like that, called Productivityist, where it wasn't, that he was an expert. It was more, he doesn't claim to be an expert. I don't think you probably would either, although people would say you are and, have that thrust on you and whatever, whether for good or for bad, whatever. And he talked about, a person like that being a person who wants to get more, now again, buzzword, efficient, or more, again, another buzzword, effective, with their work, or working on ways to get better work done. And we talked a lot about, stop doing productivity and start being productive for the fact that you want to live a better life. You want to do the stuff you want to do, like family and, comics and podcasts.
Right. Well, I've done a similar thing in the past, and I can only speak for myself, but there's one part of that that's a little bit defensive, and another part of that is just purely honest. The purely honest part is that, as much as to my chagrin, people, I don't know how to say this without sounding ungrateful, but I have in the past, not through any doing of my own, been called a productivity guru, which makes me cringe a little bit, because the honest part is I do think of myself as a student of these things. My pal John Siracusa one time said something along the lines of like, would you want to take your productivity advice from somebody who's great at it or claims to be great at it, or do you want to take it from somebody who's struggling with it and trying hard at it? Something along those lines. And that's how I feel about it. Is that I am a student of it in the sense that I've sought it out. So, starting 43 folders, I started out with it because I had a lot to say, but I also feel like I had a lot to learn. And then the defensive part of it is, like anything, it's almost like that annoying thing Jon Stewart does or Stephen Colbert does, both of whom I really like and admire. But they do this thing that I think is a little weak, where they go, hey, I'm not really a journalist, I'm just a comic. And it's like, that's not really entirely accurate. You guys have seen the figures. You know how many people of a given age get most of their news, so to speak, from watching your show. And it's a little bit disingenuous of you to say that just because, you can't just throw your hands up in the air and go, I'm just, making fun of George W. Bush. And in my case, it is somewhat disingenuous to sit there and make my living from talking about productivity stuff. And then on the other hand, say, well, you can't really take me to task on anything I say because I'm just throwing it out there. I've done that in the past. And I think that's a little weak too. But, I think all of us who do this start out as students. And then as soon as we start getting a little bit of traffic and attention, it's very natural to enjoy that recognition, or I don't know what you call it, and then to kind of find yourself happily bearing the mantle of being a guru or a teacher. It's your authority in that makes people want to go to your site. And it's one of the pitfalls of doing this kind of stuff that you have to look out for.
Yeah.
So
I started this podcast, 30 plus odd episodes into it, and I wanted to specifically ask people their thoughts on productivity, how it works out in their life. I wanted to see what they'd tried and failed to do, and then how they then tried again and kept going, And yes. So then, so I'm the student here. When it comes to being the host, I am the student. I don't make any claims to be otherwise. But what's funny is people come up and they'll say, how do you do this? How do you do that? And I was like, well, I've learned this, I've learned that. So, my goal is hopefully never to stop being a student. So
I totally agree. And I had this conversation with my daughter yesterday where we were taking down the giant size, like ridiculous, like 5-foot high Spider-Man decal that she had over her bed. And don't get me wrong, she still likes Spidey. I'm not going to be defensive, but because she wanted to put up Perry the Platypus that we got from the new Phineas and Ferb magazine. And as happens so often with a 5-year-old, of course, I'm getting my fingers a little too deeply in the pie and going, well, here, let me take it out. Let me carefully take it out. I'm going to remove the staples. I don't want to rip this because I'm a nerd. And then, I was like trying to gently say, do you want some help with taping this up? Why don't I should just let her do it. Yeah. But I'm standing there and going like, okay, why don't I hold this? You tell me if it's high enough and then I'll tape it. And she goes, no, I know how to do it. So that's a teachable moment for both of us. Because on the one hand, she's got to go and tape up her own crooked platypus sometimes. But I think it's hard for a little kid because she thinks she knows how to swim and she thinks she knows how to ride a bike. But the truth is she would drop like a stone in both cases because she hasn't done it enough. And I said something, I did one of those dumb things you say to a kid that is all about you and not about them, which is something I do a lot. But I said something along the lines of, well, I try to learn new stuff every day. And I think that's a good thing. Because you're a kid and you still have a lot to learn. I'm an old guy and I still have a lot to learn. And, it's again stupid, right? Why did I say this? But it's really hard to get better at stuff in life unless you're, looking for ways that you can learn new stuff. And even if that's something dumb about tape, even if it's me showing you a slightly better way to use the scissors so that you don't kill yourself but can still open the Amazon package. But no, I think you're right. And my pal John Roderick and I talk about this on a thing we do. When we're both kind of music fans. Well, he's a music maker. But when you start just dismissing all new music, you're officially an old man at that point. You stop growing because now you're the same 45-year-old guy that in 1965 said, the Beatles, what about Nat King Cole or whatever?
Yeah.
Not that Nat King Cole's not great. But anyway, that's the beautiful part about doing that is, and I think I know I said this in the very first episode of Back to Work, is that how I admire people like the example I used was Kevin Kelly. People who have such a restless sense of curiosity that they, as old as they ever get, they still remain young and malleable because they are looking for ways that they could be wrong or could be better. And, in the midst of all of this blathering about productivity and efficiency, I think that should be one of the values, is it's not just about acquiring a raw tonnage of information that may or may not be useful. It's about keeping up enough with new ideas that you can find ways to evolve.
Yeah.
And I think that could benefit anybody.
Yeah. So kind of going back again to the originality of what I want to talk about here real quick is when you started 43 Folders, like where did you have the interest come from where you got interested in or heard about this thing called productivity that you would have, wrestled with it and become a student of it to the point where you created 43 Folders?
Well, it was a funny mix. There's part of it that was practically hardwired in me and part of it that was very new to me. The hardwired part is that I've always, as a latchkey child living in Ohio, near you, I was always very interested in, reference books and learning things. And, I was a reader. And so, and alongside that, my mom was in real estate. So I was some of the things I was reading were like sales books and things like motivational books, like Zig Ziglar books and stuff like that, which now seem pretty cheesy to me. But at the time, like anybody, whether I realized it or not, I was searching for a certain kind of, meaning in things. And so I would really seek those things out. With that said, I've never been a giant fan of self-help in general. And in fact, by the time I got to college and was a very cynical about everything, I really felt like it was another way. And as I was self-radicalized in college, I started to become more skeptical about the way you could get people hooked on self-help and the way that it was a certain kind of cultural hegemony to try and teach people to think of themselves as broken in a certain habitual way. Specifically with regard to 43 Folders, that was at a time where, to be honest, I didn't have a lot of work. I was doing freelance stuff, and I was in a period where I didn't have that much going on. It was bumming my head. But when I had stuff before, I felt like I was constantly struggling to apply the skills and expertise that I felt I had or should have, or better put, maybe should have access to. And I felt like I so frequently, like anybody, I would have one of those uncommonly productive days where I would not only get everything I wanted to do done, but I would get things I'd been procrastinating about done. And then I would do something cool, and I would do something nice for my then girlfriend, now wife. And I would catch myself at 4 PM going, wait a minute, what happened today?
Yeah.
And then for every one of those days I felt like I had 9 or 12 days where 4 o'clock meant, what did I actually do today? I haven't done anything. And so 43 Folders was, I think, a combination of these certain things, these really weird afield things that had really gotten my attention and had become an obsession for me. As I said before, things like Getting Things Done by David Allen and Quicksilver and Life Hacks, Danny O'Brien's Life Hacks talk, all in my head worked together, which at the time I think seemed very strange. That, and also this is, I'm sorry to prattle here, but the other thing that can't be overlooked that I feel like I must always remind people is there was a time when Apple was not what it is today. Yeah. There was a time when being a Mac user, I don't want to overstate this. I'm not trying to talk about civil rights here, but there was a time when people thought you were super duper weird and fruity. Apple, you were real fruity if you used a Mac because you were like deliberately trying to like buck the system in a really annoying way. And my point being, there was not that much stuff out there about using a Mac that was not mostly about the technology. So there was stuff, certainly. There was whatever, Mac Week, Mac World, Mac User, Tidbits, fantastic thing that's still around. But they were mostly about, well, here's a new version of FileBuddy. It wasn't so much about, well, here's how to implement a getting things done like system using the available tools. Because the available tools were like Entourage or, Outlook Express and so forth. And so I guess all those things came together, especially with having a little time on my hands, that I started that site. And I've started a lot of sites, especially back then. I mean, I would just start a site on a whim, but that one caught on. And I had a lot to say about it. And then before, in a way that was very, very surprising to me, it really caught on by 2000, whatever that was, 2004 standards. It got very, very popular and has, I'm happy to say, and chagrined to say, been credited with kicking off the productivity blog genre. Others had existed before, but I don't think they gained as much traction with as many different kinds of geeks and nerds as 43 Folders did, and then I kind of wrote on that for a long time. Not in a bad way, but I mean that became my job, which could not have made me any happier.
Well, I'm glad you did it. I mean, I am one of those geeks, those nerds that at the time then I wasn't about to go read. I hadn't yet read Getting Things Done yet, and it was one of those things that was kind of a shoehorn into really me doing better stuff with my time and actually getting a lot more done. And so, thank you for that. But I kind of don't love the fact that, people started there and then went on to do, steroid type versions of it, but in weird, weird mutant ways.
Is that a coded statement?
I have no idea.
Is that about eating egg whites and sitting in a hammock?
It could be. And but it was one of those things where I think you came along at the right time as kind of a bridge between, some of the executive, suit and tie stuff that was still around. I mean, especially, David's book, Getting Things Done. I mean, you guys did for Back to Work did the series on that.
Oh, right. Thanks for remembering that. Yeah.
What was funny was you guys put that out. You put out the first episode of our GTD series the same week I put out my interview with David Allen, and I was just like, oh my gosh, that's ironic.
He wasn't doing very much podcast stuff at that time.
No.
I think I will say that his company, him to an extent, but his company in particular were very skeptical about how much of David they wanted to expose to, a lay audience.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. That's a get, man.
It was really cool. I mean, ultimately, I was just thinking, okay, I eventually want to talk to him. Let me lay, the groundwork or the first ask out of many I assume we'll be having. And literally the next day, his wife emailed me back and said, he'd love to do it. Here, is this day and time work for you? And obviously, I was about to move everything out of the way to do it. So, yes.
Catherine, she's quite a character.
Yeah.
The other thing about David that's funny is I'm thinking of three people here. Brad Ellis, the guy who works at my hot dog place, and David Allen are the only three people I think that I've ever met who talk faster than I do. David, if you listen to some of his wonderful seminars, I can't believe how many words he jams into such a small amount of space, and how many of them are actually really, really good. But we talk about the benefits of expertise. He's lived inside of that stuff for so long, and if you really listen to what he says, he's been a basket case for so long that he's great at it now, and he is the guru's guru. But we went to the same college, something like 25 years apart, a very small college, and which I only learned a long time after starting with his stuff. But, it's a place where it's like the island of misfit toys, and, he was this real crazy rebel who my best friend in high school's dad knew him when he went to New College. And he was famous for being this outsider character who rode around on a motorcycle. And then he really did lots of odd jobs and had a terrible time fitting in. He wrote his entire Getting Things Done book and then threw it out because he didn't like it. So, it's easy to look at David Allen and see yet another guy who talks about efficiency, but he's a freak.
Yeah.
In the old school awesome sense of the word. And I think he's brought a lot of that to his work and is sympathetic to people who have a laundry list of excuses for why they can't be productive. And sometimes his answers aren't always 100% satisfying, but he's got an answer for everything. And if you really think about it, a lot of his answers are really spot on. So I owe that guy so much, and he's been so gracious with me. And doing that interview was just giant for me. I mean, that was a real honor.
Yeah. Well, and to prep for that, I honestly did go back to your interview with him to just kind of take some notes and think, how do I crack this nut again? I mean, so many people, he's done so much. So many other people have interviewed him. Mm-hmm. And it's so many years later. How do you revisit GTD from the guy who wrote it? Right. But get something. How do I ask him something no one's ever asked him?
It's like interviewing Santa about Christmas,
right?
Like you kind of feel like a dork. But two things I like about those interviews, and I think there were something like we recorded them all at a pass, but released it as I think 6 episodes. It ended up being about 90 minutes. But two things I really like about that are, first of all, that at least to my knowledge, and I was a bit of a David Allen scholar for quite a while, he said a lot of stuff I'd never heard him say before. And, with much deference and respect, I tried to push him a little bit on some things I felt that he had not addressed as completely as I would like as an acolyte. But I thought he answered him really well. And he ended up saying, of course, a bunch of stuff I'd heard, but some things I'd never heard. But, the second part, I really like that you get some of his playful personality in that. And, what a dork he is in some ways.
Yeah.
He makes jokes that aren't all that funny. And he's like us. He's just a dude, but he's gotten better at being that dude by walking a path that we've all had to walk. So he knows whereof he speaks, and even as much as he might work for people like Target and Goldman Sachs, he can still be a great model to us because he's really thought this through. And if you need a comprehensive, if you're a mess, you could do a lot worse than starting with Getting Things Done. 100%.
Oh yeah. Have you ever listened to the audiobook of it at all?
Yes.
Do you find, I know that when you guys did the series on Back to Work about GTD, you talked about, some of the perceived or maybe feedback you'd received as some people in terms of reading the book. Do you think there's any difference in listening to him speak the book? Or is there a better jumping on place to get a nuts and bolts visit first?
Well, this is, as John Siracusa would say, non-canonical, but the canonical thing you've got to do, in my opinion. There is no shortcut for this. You must read the book, at a pass. You need to read it all the way through. Trust me, at least once. There are things you will get from reading the book, I think, that you won't get from most other things. I don't love the audiobook. There are some things like, for example, one that always comes to mind, John Hodgman's book, The Areas of My Expertise, which I looked at the book and was completely perplexed and I thought, this is interesting, but it makes no sense. Whereas the audiobook is one of the greatest things I've ever heard. Right. I think the opposite is true of Getting Things Done. It's not a bad audiobook, but I feel like when you read the book, it felt much more personal to me. I felt more of the "this is for me" aspects of it than that. Now, with that said, the non-canonical part, you may know about this or have this, but there's something the David Allen Company does not like at all, and basically has made every attempt to eradicate every copy of, which is called Getting Things Done Fast.
Yes.
Have you ever heard it?
I have heard of it. I have not actually ever heard it.
Well, you never know. A copy might fall off a truck for you.
Yeah.
This is a multiple CD series of what I believe is the original Getting Things Done 2-day workshop. And I think, setting aside the horrible light jazz saxophone music that they use interstitially, it's a masterclass in getting things done because he goes into a lot of detail with a live audience. Obviously, it's before. I think it might be before he wrote the book. I'm not. In any case, if one can find a copy, it is fantastic. It's very long. Obviously, it's a 2-day course. But if you're looking to kind of get back into getting things done, and reading the book doesn't, immediately get you reinvigorated, boy, this thing sure will. And just in passing, the other thing I feel like I always need to say is that if you're into getting things done, or you have been into getting things done, it does benefit you very much to read the book more than once. I'm always like the Wire guy. Like, oh, you got to go watch The Wire. It's the best TV show ever. Watch it 5 times. But in this case, like every time I read that book, I feel like, especially the first 3 times I read it, which I am not embarrassed to say, I've read it multiple times, I got something different every time. And it wasn't until probably the 3rd reading, and it wasn't until like I'd had that interview with him that he was kind enough to do, that I really understood what those altitudes meant. I was so interested in the tips and tricks to-do list stuff that I was missing. He in like maybe 2 sentences, he really shined a light for me by saying, well, if there's anything you'd like to be doing that's beyond your task and project level, if any part of that is on your mind, even if it's something 20 years from now, if any part of that is on your mind, it's no different than a phone call that you haven't returned or an email you haven't responded to. And when he said that, it was an aha moment for me, because I think a lot of people want to skip that section of the book that's about all that up in the clouds junk of like, what's my destiny stuff. But, if there's some part of you like me, I hate thinking about my daughter having to go to college. I think probably the college university system, with all respect, will be in tatters in 13 years. But anyway, I'm sorry. I'm going on. It's early here, and I've had some coffee, so I apologize.
No, that is totally fine. One thing I wanted to bring up was I definitely had to star a tweet that you retweeted. Somebody else tweeted it, and you retweeted it. It was when you guys were doing the series. They said something along the line. It was like an SAT question, and it said, Bob Dylan is to All Along the Watchtower, or Bob Dylan. I'm totally messing this up.
Jimi Hendrix.
It was the Jimi Hendrix, Bob Dylan, All Along the Watchtower, connecting you and David Allen and GTD.
What a lovely thing to say.
That's just great. Instantly, I was like, oh, that makes complete sense. Yeah, I mean, you really did with 43 folders and on just take what David had done and just made it your own in your own way. No, and it's still great to listen to the original, and you can't not. But yeah, you really you took it to a whole new place and made it your own, and that was really cool.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, and it was very nice of someone to say that. But if there's any one person in the universe who is most responsible for the success of 43 folders in terms of reaching people, it's not me. It was Cory Doctorow. Writes for Boing Boing, which is still a giant site. But in 2004, man, there was Slashdot and Boing Boing. Those were the 2 things where if something you did was on Boing Boing or Slashdot, and certainly to an extent things like Hotkey or whatever, but in particular Boing Boing, was a site that drew a lot of water. And he repeatedly pointed to the site because he's actually where I learned about Danny O'Brien's Life Hacks stuff. It was his notes. I don't think there's any audio or video of the first Life Hacks talk, which I really wish I'd been at. But it was his linking to me that made that site really take off. And one of the things he said, I think probably in the first post ever, that I will always be so grateful for, was what you're describing, which, and this is so nice and so humbling, was that, if you read the David Allen book, and it's kind of, think of it in the 2001 incarnation, it's really a book for people like David Allen. It's a book for guys who fly around in suits and do stuff with other guys in suits. And it was so nice of Cory to say that basically I had adapted this for a geek audience, that I was. And I don't mean to toot my own horn. What I mean to say is thank you, Cory, for doing this. Mm-hmm. And thank you for saying that. Because that ended up, when I read that, I was like, wow, that is actually what I want to do. I want to take this thing that's been so great for me because I've been able to adapt it and try to find ways to keep adapting it for the completely different conditions of life for somebody like a sysadmin. I mean, a sysadmin having something like an at-computer context is not a terribly useful thing. So how do we, as we used to say, hack on that to make it adaptable in a way that keeps the flavor and brio and usefulness of getting things done, but then helps us to understand that it can and must be adapted for how we think, which I think David would agree with.
Oh, yeah, yeah. One of the other things, obviously, we can't not say in terms of popularity of the site was the fact that, and most people, well, some do, some don't, know the term Inbox Zero, that you coined it. Like you wrote the words Inbox Zero together, and now it became yours. No, that people, you see people tweeting out, hashtag Inbox Zero on Twitter like they're Mel Gibson and Braveheart, freedom. Although if they were to implement it the right way, it would feel like freedom instead of, anyway, email. But whatever. I gotta ask, you coined it. What did you originally mean by it? Because I know that even you have referenced, that it's been taken different places or ways, and you even did this recently with a Kung Fu Grip post about chasing the right zero. Like, I gotta ask, what did it start off as? What was Inbox Zero originally intended as, and then maybe how has it morphed, and how do you look at it now?
That's a very good question. It started out as, there's something I don't like about myself, which is that sometimes I have to get emotional about something to want to, well, how can I put this? Sometimes I end up writing about something or doing a podcast about something or whatever. I end up saying something about something because I've gotten emotional about it. In a really weird and paradoxical way, I think Inbox Zero was probably one of the earlier things that was about productivity, but also about not getting wound up in productivity. Because as somebody who had vended that stuff several times a day for a couple years before that, I started to get frustrated with how much people were trying to solve the email problem, in quotes, through these methods that I thought were strangely Byzantine, given how little usefulness they had. And so Inbox Zero was a series I did. And I mean, gosh, it was all told, it was less than 10,000 words, probably something. I mean, it wasn't a lot. But it was basically the core of Inbox Zero, which it's not hard to see is very heavily influenced by David Allen, is that, if I had to say it in one sentence, the original version, if you have time to check your email, you must find time to do something about that email. That it doesn't make sense. We're all really good at checking, but few of us, at least for myself, I'll say, it's a very different thing to be good at doing something with email rather than just simply checking for new email. And then, in fact, habitually, over and over, checking for email without doing something about that email is abusing not simply the medium, but also your own attention and time. So then to go out one concentric circle. And so there was this kind of ridiculously basic system that seems so obvious now, which is that it's the classic productivity trope of touch it once. So if you have time to check email, and that sounds silly because, as David says, you're always going to be checking for bombs and stuff in there. But if you are going to check your email, why don't you sit down like a gentleman and actually do something with it? And let's update our idea of what we do when we do email. Because even at that time, I think it was still conventional wisdom that you respond to most of your email. And at that time, spam was becoming spam was, I don't want to say becoming, it was already, spam was a huge problem in 2000, whatever that was, 5. And also, it was certainly apparent, definitely by then, that people were using email for very different things. And what I guess one thing I would say in retrospect is, you don't have control over what's in your inbox. So if you let that inbox determine your actions, that's something you really might want to think about. And if you are somebody who needs to check email frequently, then that's your job now. You get to do less other stuff if that's your job. So if that is your job, then why don't you treat it like you're a professional? And so every time you look at that email and you make a one-time decision about it. Right? Is this something I need to respond to? In which case, I could send a quick response. Is it something I need to do something about? Which means I either put it on my calendar or put it on a task list. Is it something I need to do research about and so forth? Or is it something I can just delete or archive? And, I think one of the things in Inbox Zero that I hope was useful to people is that there is a staggering amount of stuff in most of our email that we can choose to either to let go of. If you've ever come back from a vacation, I think I said this at the time, I don't recall, but if you come back from a vacation and you see those 1,000 emails or whatever in there, there's a strange freeing feeling of seeing how many things resolve themselves in a fairly short amount of time, how many things you really have time to do anything about, right? If you come back from vacation and you see like a week of stuff or 2 weeks of stuff, are you going to sit there and treat that with the same amount of time as you would have spent fiddling with your BlackBerry anytime during that 2 weeks? Well, no. You're going to go in and find probably the stuff from, I used to do this all the time in like Entourage. I used to love the way you could sort in Entourage. Mm-hmm. And you could, group things by topic or, group things by the sender. And so I would always go through in a case like that and look for stuff from the important people who I knew I needed to deal with. I would always start there. I would really always, and I still do this today, start with the most recent emails and work backward, because there's a very good chance that the most recent stuff is the stuff you still need to do something about. And obviously the conventional wisdom, again, would be start with the oldest one and move forward. But I think it's much more encouraging to say, wow, if I get 5 of these emails done that are most recent, I'm going to feel much more energized to go through the rest of these. And when you get that velocity going and saying, okay, archive it, make it a task, archive, make it a task. Well, if you really go through those 1,000 or even like 50 emails and you end up, if you go through 50 emails and come up with 40 tasks, I think that gives you a weird amount of perspective to go, whoa, am I really going to do these 40 things? Well, okay, then do those 40 things or defer them into a place you'll do them later, but then also mindfully accept that every one of those things that you do is 10,000 other things you can't do. And this is the real, postdoc level of productivity, is realizing that your time and attention are so limited. So yeah, in 2005, 100% it was about me saying, look, guys, this is not complicated. It's only complicated because you're dealing with other people. You can't control those people, and you can't control what they think they deserve from you. And so you have to have what I would then call, I don't know if they still teach this, defensive driving. Don't worry about what anybody else is going to do. Don't assume that anybody's going to do the right thing. Just make sure that you protect yourself and do everything you can to not harm others. And that's where it started. So, I don't want to sound smug and go, oh, it's really about time and attention. It is, but it was a very tactical approach to email. And doing that talk at Google, again, that was another watershed for me because, so many people have watched some part of the Inbox Zero talk. And that was what ended up having a huge influence. When I went to Google and people were talking about getting hundreds and hundreds of emails a day, they invented the app called Gmail, because people at Google get lots of mail. It's why I still use Gmail's web interface to this day. If you learn the key commands for Gmail, I defy you to show me a faster way to get through your inbox and back to your work. So that was really long, but that's where it started.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's very much in my head. It's very much evolved. The 2 points in the times, kind of interregnum since then. On the one hand, wow, thank you, world. I'm glad everybody loves Inbox Zero. Their version of it is taken off as a phrase. I now have 3 email apps on my phone that use the phrase Inbox Zero in what I would consider sort of a weird way. But it did take on a life of its own. Somebody I think is probably a friend of mine created a Twitter account, I think just to provoke me in a funny way. And every Friday afternoon, it only does exactly one thing, which is every Friday afternoon at about 4 o'clock Pacific, it says Inbox Zero, all caps, exclamation point. And just to provoke, because people know how much, my friends know how much that drives me bananas and is actually antithetical to that idea. So on the one hand, it forked off in this direction that had, and I wish I could say I care more today, but I really don't. Okay, whatever. If that works for you, that's great. But for myself, for example, and I don't want to get too far into the book stuff because it's a rabbit hole, but trying to write this book about Inbox Zero made me just not even want to think about it anymore.
Yeah.
And that combined with all of this deliberate misapprehension of what I was talking about, I thought it made me go kind of dead to it. But yeah, and I've definitely rethought that in the context of where my head is today as somebody who's a little older and who has more stuff that I really have to do, have to do, has made me rethink that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it started out absolutely as email, and it started out as something that I could post to my blog that I thought would be posts that people would like.
Well, obviously they did get liked. I mean, it got the traffic. One of the things that I've always kind of saw it as is, like how David Allen talks a lot about in his book, because he didn't have, email in the format that even you were talking about then in 2005 or even now in, 2013.
Not crazy.
Yeah, right. He's talking about a physical inbox often in the actual Getting Things Done book. And I just kept thinking, well, okay, so metaphorical or whatever you want to call it, the inbox. In other words, the place where people who have expectations of me, or myself included, put something when there's something that has to be done. So I didn't always ever, end up just looking at it as just the email inbox, but any kind of channel that, you'd open up and people could tell you stuff or send you stuff, etc. I've even heard you did the thing where, you wouldn't stand at the You wouldn't stand at the post office box,
Well, yeah,
pull
that was
everything
pretty
out,
funny. That's a
fiddle
good
through
line.
it, and then throw it back in.
Nobody stands by their mailbox at home waiting to see what's in there. They go there once a day and then deal with it.
Yeah, you bring it in the house,
That's
sort
reductive,
through,
but it's
throw it, whatever.
definitely the same pattern.
Yeah. But so has it morphed at all in your head where it's not just about email specifically or even vaguely, I guess? I mean, I know it's about time and attention when it comes to email, or at least it originally was, especially with working with email specifically. But, I mean, has it changed at all?
You're asking a terrific question. And yes, so two things here. Number one, you talked about the physical inbox with David Allen. Well, I mean, one thing that was so different in 2000 when he was writing it, I guess, or 2001 when it came out, was that there really was not things like ubiquitous Wi-Fi. There were not as many people. I mean, certainly, I'm not going to say it's. I mean, we're not talking about like the 1930s here. People were using email a lot for lots of things. It was a problem for people. It was the problem for people. Whereas today, I think probably meetings feel a lot more like a problem than email for a lot of people in big companies. But that's one thing that was different, and one thing I kept craving an update of in the book was how to deal with the electronic life. But I'll just honestly, and I would still say this today to anybody getting ready to dive into the very big process of getting things done. That physical inbox idea is huge. I mean, and what he says in the book specifically is get like a giant physical inbox. And again, to quote him, if you don't have an inbox, your whole life turns into an inbox. Your boat and your car and your garage or whatever turns into an inbox. So what I hope I'm saying this correctly. I think what he recommends is starting over with pretty much everything that's on your mind and turning it into something in that inbox. Like your calendar, like if you're keeping a day timer, as he mentions, throw that in your inbox because you probably need to start over with that. If you are thinking about your boat, write boat on a card or a piece of paper and throw it in there because, it's that collection, that initial collection is so critical because part of the reason you're resistant to doing all those different things that aren't at your desk is because they're not at your desk and because they feel like something where you have to go somewhere and do something. And so if you write boat, that's a terrible example, but if you write boat, let's stick with that, and you throw it in your inbox and then process it, you're going to ask yourself, what is the significance of boat? Well, boat is like, I need to sell this, or I need to get the barnacles taken off, or I need to find a new place, a new berth for it or something. Or it could be something as simple as, I just want to get new curtains for it. Well, once you take boat and boil it down to go to Walmart to buy boat curtains, I don't know if they have a nautical curtain department, but you're playing on a different level at that point. So first of all, the physical inbox thing I think is huge. Something I'm probably stealing from him, but I'm not sure. I don't even know what I originally said anymore. But to me, an inbox, and this is something I think I came up with when working on the Godforsaken book, which is the only way I can refer to it, was that the aha moment for me was when, because I was struggling with the idea that this was going to be a book about email. And I was, to be honest, trying to find these bigger patterns because I thought it was about more than email, but I also needed it to be about more than email. I wanted the book to have longevity. And I think I always get this wrong, but what I said was that to me, an inbox is anything that might contain something that you might be interested in or might need to know about. So, and those mites are very...
That's a lot of mites.
And they're all significant. Because if you knew what was in your inbox, it wouldn't be an inbox anymore. It would just be unprocessed stuff. The thing that makes an inbox so harrying for most of us is that we don't know if anything is in there. And then once we know what's in there, we haven't made a decision about what to do with it. And then once we have made a decision about what to do with it, it may be something we haven't done yet. And so the second part of that then is, yes, first of all, it might be something you might need to know about, but also that every inbox I don't want to say by definition, but for most of us, email inboxes, in any kind of inbox represents things that are unknown, undefined, and incomplete. You know what I mean? And so just checking your email turns the unknown into the incomplete. Looking at something, it turns the unknown into the undefined. And then I always forget the second one. Unknown, unprocessed, however you want to think of it. It's going to drive me crazy because it'll come back to me. But, just checking email means now, like if you just go and look at the subject line and maybe browse this, well, you haven't made a decision about what you're going to do with it. So it sits there read. Okay, so now, you know something's in there. You know what's in there. But then if you haven't decided what to do about it, that's going to weigh on you. If you've decided what to do about it, but use your, as I like to say, use your inbox as a to-do list, well, now you're mixing 3 very different kinds of things together in one place. So to me, step 0 in nerd language is to say, well, okay, if this thing's an inbox, whatever that is, whether that's email or whether that's my P.O. box or whether that's my relationship with my family, I first have agreed that that's an inbox that I'm going to take care of, right? So that sounds silly, but there's so many things that we're worried about checking on, but we haven't fully accepted. And even if we have fully accepted it, we have not committed ourselves to spending time to do it well, which again means you can't do other things well. So, first of all, accept if that is an inbox you want to take seriously, then you have to treat it seriously and you have to do things to take care of it. I don't know. I guess I feel like that ends up being one of the most problematic parts. The second problematic part is that we don't take our inboxes seriously. But the first and much larger problematic part is we either are unaware of our inboxes or we've taken them lightly. And then we end up adopting so many things, or put differently, we allow so many things into our life that we have an uncertain relationship with. If you allow too many things like that into your life at different places, it should not be surprising to you that you're not being productive or effective because you are, as they say, spreading yourself too thin. That ability to say no or maybe is a very difficult thing for us to do, but it's the only thing that can ensure that we do the things that we claim matter to us. Did that even vaguely answer your question?
Yes, it did. Yes, very much so. In a lot of ways, you're talking about pick and choose specifically where you're going to allow, your inputs, and you're choosing the good things over the everything.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, yeah. Boy, there's always 2 parts for me, isn't there? Yes, that is, I guess, good things. Not to, disassemble what you're saying. It's a thing that I've decided needs to be done by me. And that could be a good thing. But there's a lot of stuff I don't want to do that I have to do. Mm-hmm. And I always end up getting into this really cheesy thing about...
You decide that because based on the, for example, there may be stuff like, take out the garbage or this or that or whatever that are things you don't necessarily want to do, but you do them because it's the quote unquote caretaking of the home. And that's where your chosen... or it chose you, or whatever you want to put it, family life is.
Like JC.
There you go.
It's a life that chose me.
It's 99 Problems. And
but an inbox ain't one.
Right. There's the title.
Speech. Anyway, sorry.
But you see what I'm saying? Like, you do the things you don't want to do based on, especially when they're tied to the things that are the things you have to do and especially, hopefully, want to do over everything else.
Yeah, I mean, like when I say it's 2 things, I think these are very interlocking. So yeah, I mean, if this is stuff that needs to be done, but I mean, hopefully I'm phrasing that somewhat carefully. Like it's things that need to be done by me, and I accept that. That's really different from right. So if I accept this input, first of all, like I do need to do something about it, but I've set my phone now to forward to Google Voice because I guess my number's in the wild. And I get these incredibly bizarre calls from nobody and blocked and all of this stuff. And it's, every time like an idiot, I take the bait and pick it up, it's something stupid. And so now I have everything go to Google Voice because that's no longer an inbox that I can accept in that format. Boy, that sounds really like I'm trying to be a big shot, but that's honest. That's me being honest. Like if it's something, if it's from my wife, she's probably going to text me. If it's something important, somebody will leave a message. If I don't have control over who has access to that phone number anymore, right, and I don't want to go just change it, well, the closest hack I have right now is to just say that's no longer an inbox I will deal with in that form. I care a lot about what's in there, but you're going to have to also jump through the hoops of leaving a message and then I will call you back because that shows you take it seriously too. But here's the second part, and this is giant, is that, and this is why they say they're interlocking, is that, yes, you've accepted this as an inbox that you need to do something about, or if you, in your parlance, want to do something about, a good thing. But you must always accept that everything you agree to do is other things you can't do. Boy, I will never stop saying that because I don't think people accept that. There are people in this world, the phrase that you used a little while back, or the word that you used was things you choose to do. Well, I don't think people are really choosing to do things because choosing has the implication not only of selecting something, choosing also has the implication of not choosing other things. And I think that is a distinction that has a difference. Look at it this way. If you choose to go to dinner at this restaurant tonight, you're also choosing to not go to dinner at every other restaurant in the world. And that is so obvious that it's depressing to me that more people don't understand that. And as I've said before, this is why you can't have 27 priorities. It's like saying you have 27 arms. Everything that you take on is other stuff you can't do. That means, so if you've got 50 things on your list to do today, well, good luck. If you can do those 50, more power to you. But most people can't. And it's because they're not accepting they can't do 50 things well today. And they continue to live in this fantasy world of thinking that just because they wrote down a noun on a piece of paper, it's something that they're going to do. Well, no, that just means you've taken the time to capture something you don't really care about. So that has become so significant for me and so difficult for me because I want everybody to like me. I want to please people. I want them to think that I'm cool and smart. I want them to think, in an ideal world, to think that I'm responsive. But again, first principles. I don't control who emails me. I don't control who calls me. And there's a reason that our house has a door. People are not allowed to drift in whenever it suits them and then talk about selling me some shoes. Like you have to knock, I have to acknowledge, and if I don't feel like answering the door, well, deal. Because I've got to give my daughter a bath. And I challenge you to tell me what's more important about you wandering into my house than me getting my daughter to not be dirty. So I don't know. I don't mean to get all keyed up about that, but it's one of those things where I am an evangelist for this idea of what I can really melodramatically call care and sacrifice, which I don't want to get into that. It's too up in the trees. But all I will say is that there's a practical point to all of this. You would never agree to go to 300 Christmas parties on the same night. Mm-hmm. So why would you agree to do 300 one-hour tasks in the same day? You have to reject the ones that are not the most important to you. To go straight back to David Allen, if you persistently make and then break deals with yourself, if you put things on the calendar to force yourself to do things and then make them red and bold and 3 exclamation points, well, if you're not actually doing that stuff, you're breaking a deal with yourself and you are, as I like to say, putting compost into your crisper. You're buying a bunch of produce and then throwing garbage on top of it. There's no way you're going to want to cook anything in your refrigerator because you are allowing moldy food to accumulate. Boy, that was long. You gotta get rid of this. Is
No. I've heard it referred to, in the business world, whatever that means, as opportunity cost. And I think that's a really good, as much as, those words are somewhat foreign to some people, like, I think it describes it pretty well because every choice is an opportunity. Like you choose, it's a fork in the road or multiple forks for that matter, where you pick between all these different things, but you only get to pick one for that time and space and that, whatever context.
Yeah, we understand, I think I said this during the Inbox Zero talk, but we all understand that we should understand that our wallet is for holding money, not making money. So when we spend the money that's in our wallet, it doesn't replenish itself. And yet, it seems like a lot of us, when we become frustrated, it's because we haven't accepted that we've acted like we have more time and attention than we do. So I like that phrase opportunity cost a lot. And I want to stipulate I am not an economist or smart person. I don't even know if that's an economic term. I think it is. Opportunity cost, I think one example of that, for example, might be, I think opportunity costs can be looked at very much in terms of something scarce like money, right? So if I spend $3.99 plus tax on this comic book, that's now $3.99 plus tax that I don't have to spend on other stuff. So, and like I said, when you're in college and you have to decide between like food and laundry, you really get that. But then there's another phrase that has cost in it that I like, which it's sunk cost fallacy, which you can Google. Listener. And sunk cost fallacy, as I've heard it phrased, is that once you've poured a lot of, in this case, money, like resources into something, it's easy to develop a certain kind of blindness to whether you should keep spending money on that. Like let's say you've got a crappy car like we have, and you put in a new engine and a new transmission, and then a year later you have to put in a new timing belt, and a year later you got to get a new windshield. What you're thinking about is the money you spent in the past rather than whether it's still a good investment for the future. And not to be political, but I've heard people say that was the problem with the various wars we've had in the Middle East, is that once we start deciding whether to stay somewhere based on what we have lost and sacrificed there, we're not really honoring the lives of those people. We're just going to lose more lives chasing our money, if you like. So yeah, cost and those cost terms are sticky for us because they get to something that gets lost in productivity, which is that there's a finite amount of time and attention. We understand there's a finite amount of money, but we don't always understand there's a finite amount of attention. And in the same way that you probably want to buy milk before you play blackjack, why wouldn't you have that same conceit to say that paying attention to this and spending my time on this is more valuable than all these 10,000 other things? If I haven't figured out what one thing trumps those, and I despise that word priority, but if I haven't made a decision about what has to always trump everything else, then I don't have clarity about what I care about. And I will never really get good at anything because I've allowed the entire world to decide what's valuable to me. And that's not a life.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the part where I have to say this is really turning out to sound much like a back to work episode, which
it's your show.
Feels really good to me because, when I because you guys have been doing that for like 2.5 years now. And with Back to Work, when I first found out about it,
co-hosted by my friend Dan Benjamin.
Yes. Which I'm just I found it through one of your tweets on episode 1. It was like, hey, we just did this, and I'm like, what? Merlin did a podcast. Is he going to keep doing it?
Isn't he supposed to be feeling bad about his book that'll never get written? I'm still mad at you about this other thing. Why are you doing something cool?
Yeah. I'll admit, I was one of the ones who thought, oh, cool, that's going to happen. And then, honestly, when you said it wasn't going to happen, you did the cranking thing, which was really well written. Come on, seriously, it was good.
It was a little melodramatic, but thank you.
But you meant it when you meant it, and
it was a hard Thursday evening when I wrote that.
Yeah. So, but I mean, honestly,
back to work.
Yeah. You started Back to Work with Dan because you'd started a relationship with him, and which
he wouldn't leave me alone. He used to pretend to like what I did. Whereas today, he's obviously doesn't, and he would just browbeat, Merlin, why don't we should do a show? And I'm like, I can't. I have to not write a book for 18 hours a day. But yeah. I went and I did a talk, and I would someday like to tell this once there's been a little more time. I want to tell this story because it's an important story. But basically, I'd gone out of state to do a talk, and this is back when I was, I guess, making most of my dough from doing talks and presentations, which was a harder life than it sounds like. It was a very time-consuming enterprise that was very profitable for a while and then just became less profitable and very time-consuming and really defeating. Because, and I've joked about this on Roderick on the Line, just kidding, not really, which is I really don't know how much I can help people with a talk. What I have to say to people when I do a talk is not useful to most businesses. Because first of all, I'm not a typical presenter. Maybe I'm not as prepared. Maybe I'm just too weird. Maybe I use too many curse words. Maybe I talk about poop too much. But when I tell you that you can't have 27 priorities, that's not the message that people want. What they want is, give me another tool to fight my Sisyphean task. And what I'm trying to say is, maybe you need to stop pushing a rock and find a different line of work. Okay, thank you for your time. Yeah. Net 90. But I was at this place, and it was a really like a hardcore, forgive my saying, super fan who had hired me. And I just thought that the culture of where that guy was working was so heartbreaking to me, because this guy was trying so hard to do the right thing, but he and his team were not only not doing it that well, but they were, in my opinion, super duper nice guy. But their entire team was laboring under this myth, this misapprehension that they were doing things the right way and that the improvement opportunities were all these sort of tactical little tweaks that they could do. And what I was trying to say is, especially to their VP, who I ended up having a screaming match with at 2 a.m. outside an elevator, they'll never forget. I was like, you're not being honest. You're not being honest with the people you work with. You think they understand what the rules are. You think that, what I would say today is like, he's like almost like this David Brent character, where you think that you've created a certain kind of atmosphere, but what you've created is something very, very different here. And I don't feel great coming in here and taking your notes on how I should change what I have to say to make you look like the Lone Ranger or something. Because you're not. You're just another guy who's trying to micromanage everybody and be loved, which is really different from saying, I care so much about what you guys do and I trust you so much that I'm gonna get out of your way. And instead it was and I don't know, I'm going on, but it was so depressing. And I came home within one day of coming home. I don't know why. Emailed Dan and I said, we're starting a new show. That's it. And then we had one phone call about the rules of the game. And then the next day we recorded. And
Wow.
then we've recorded almost every week since. That is really, really how it happens. I've got the emails. Like, I'll tell you, it's how it happened. I mentioned it just a little bit on that first episode, but that coming home from that place and looking at my notes from that talk and trying to think about what to do next, I felt terrible because this super duper nice guy that has a picture of me in his office, I let him down. And I yelled at his boss. And I was very unprofessional. And I was mad. And I was also, at that point, really struggling with that book. And I don't know, something happened and I snapped. And I needed a reboot. I guess I was starting to realize then what I absolutely know now, which is that doing these talks is great. If I can get a big fee to go out and speak somewhere, that's fine. I'll push a broom if you can pay me my fee. But it's not helping people for me to go out and be some kind of a weird character they've never heard of who has no credibility in the company, only to meet up with the resistance of, hey, if you guys do anything that I think is valuable, you're going to get fired by David Brent. And then also just feeling this weight of like, I was still very much trying to write this book, but I was like, there's so much cool stuff I don't get to do. Not in a whiny way, but there's so much, I used to do so much cool stuff that I really liked and felt good about. And now all of my attention has been poured into this alternating series of talks and book stuff, spending up to 18 hours a day on the book, then feeling bad that I've got to go do a talk somewhere to actually make some dough. And then feeling bad that I'm not writing the book while I'm doing the talk. And I was like, this is asinine. This is not what this should be about. This should be about making a decision that lets you be the person that you want to be. And, the meta layer on top of all that was I'm supposed to be the productivity guy. I'm sitting there counseling people on all of this stuff, but I'm not eating my own dog food. But I mean, anytime that I find myself feeling uncomfortable about not living up to stuff that I talk about, well, on the one hand, like I never will. Nobody can.
Yeah. Well, you're still always going to be a student, like you said before.
But I'm also always going to be a mess. It's just that, like, can I be a mess that I can love?
Right. Or that others will love.
It's a pretty good show.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking a lot, but it's pretty good. So.
Well, I mean, when Backwork started, I got what I expected, which was, some non-cheesy ways to approach, doing more work or
this is back when
better
the show was good.
Yeah, episode 1. And,
episode 7.
But episode 7 downhill then. But you guys cover topics. Suddenly I'm like, wait a second. What is this show? You cover topics that aren't usually associated with productivity, not to mention, the great way the show is really, or also sometimes more about the relationship between you and Dan and kind of the David Letterman-esque comedy.
The conventional wisdom, I think, or the conventional annoyance is that the first half of the show is, to use the phrase I use about Dan a lot, is almost completely inscrutable. If you listen to every single episode and you've seen all the movies we talk about and the insufferable number of in-jokes that are peppered at it's shot at you like a shotgun full of rock salt.
Well, and hats off to you for starting a media guide for that.
If you just watch The Big Lebowski and Some Adventure Time and Glengarry Glen Ross, at least Alec Baldwin's talk.
Yep.
If you just watch that,
coffee's for closers.
Get them to sign on the line which is dotted. It means you are wanting, and you don't get them. See, inscrutable. But then the second half, sometimes we eventually arrive at something.
Don't forget the comics.
Well, yeah, that's become a problem. But I'm not going to sandbag. I think our show is really good. And I think it's really good because it's a show that I like and I like doing, but I like everything I do. I would not want to make a show that I wouldn't want to listen to. And I do listen to them because I think they're good. And I love my co-hosts. Scott Simpson on You Look Nice Today is, I don't say probably, he's one of the funniest people I've ever met. Super weird and very gawky. But John Roderick on the Line is, boy, I hope it's obvious. He's one of my favorite people in the whole world. Dan Benjamin is a big ball of hard to understand. But boy, is he ever smart and great to work with. And I think a pretty perfect foil for my personality. And so in each of those cases, and this gets into a whole other thing that really sounds, that's fine for Merlin. But,
Which, hey,
did you ever listen to that interview?
I would.
A lot of people are going to say.
Yeah. I was at a conference and was walking in the hallway. Guys coming towards me, and I'm like, "Is that a That's Fine for Merlin t-shirt? And it was. And so I instantly said, dude. And he turned and was like, yes. I was like, your shirt. He's like, yeah. And we hit it off instantly.
Oh, that warms my heart. But this goes very much to, gosh, as long as I'm got my own head up my butt, a talk that John Gruber and I did at South by Southwest a few years ago, which is like, you can't please everybody. We're talking about blogs in particular, which were already on the descent at that point as a thing. But if you try to please everybody, you're going to give away the pleasing a lot of people who actually care about what you do. And so, I don't know. This is probably defeating my own point in saying this, but like I've gotten a thicker skin over the years, not entirely thick. Do I not bleed when I am cut? But I have gotten much more okay with the fact that what I do is not for everybody. But if I do the best version of what I feel like I can do and have more good days than bad days, hopefully, then that's all I can really do. And like that is fine for Merlin, and what will be fine for you is the question. Like, it's easy enough to sit there in the peanut gallery and go, this is this or this is that. Well, you don't have to listen to it, but I'm going to keep doing it exactly the way I think is right. Roderick on the Line, that show is really fantastic because John is fantastic. And I would never in a million years want to change a thing that we do about that show in order to try and attract I'm imagining like when somebody hasn't chosen an avatar for like Twitter or Tumblr and you just see that silhouette. Like you know what I mean? Like you just see the egg on Twitter or you just see the silhouette on Tumblr. And it's like, there are so many silhouettes out there. Like, why would I want to treat all those people? Why would I want to try and like service all of those people if all the actual faces stop being interested? You should cut me off.
Yeah. Well, we can
cover everything. You sent me a bunch of notes.
Yeah. Ultimately, one thing
we're going to talk about apps and stuff too. Maybe that's a different episode.
We don't have to. No, I didn't. That's something else. But I have basically two questions. Like I love the fact that honestly you're doing Back to Work and then have branched off. Obviously you look nice today before Back to Work, but that you've moved into being like a podcaster, like a legit, like consistent. You do this. It's your job.
Podcaster. That's like Jumbo Shrimp and military intelligence,
or professional podcaster. And and don't tell Dan I said that. And ultimately, I just love the fact that you're proving that it can be done because it gives hope to those that have loved podcasting ever since it first was added to iTunes in 2005. And I gotta ask, like, as you've talked with Dan through, 18 episodes at this point, have there been, because you've been a student, like, again, I go back to that because that's really true. Like, as you've been a student of your own show or through your show with Dan, like, what have been some of the standout, like, where your thinking has changed or you've rethought something, I guess?
If it's not obvious from a lot of this prattling, it can take me a pretty long time to figure things out. There's a lot of stuff I can pick up fairly quickly, but then there's a lot of stuff where who knows why. Maybe I need to be wrong at something for a long time before I decide to be less wrong about it, or maybe I need emotional distance from it before I'm okay to even talk about it. I certainly think that's true of me, and I suspect of other people. As far as what's changed with that, well, I don't know. I mean, this is a little meta, like so much of what I say, but with that show, I mean, I hope I'm not like tearing back the curtain, but Dan and I have different kinds of relationships. We have relationships as friends who have never met. I've never met Dan, which I think surprises some people but we do also have an on-air rapport, and we get along pretty well because I think we understand each other, and we are in real life. We understand each other. We are sympathetic with each other, and we have a lot in common. And we find ways, if we have things that we aren't seeing eye to eye on, we generally find ways to work it out. And I think it helps a lot that we are, at least for now, very valuable to each other. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to make this mercantile, but I'm just being honest. So, I mean, one thing that's been great for me is I don't have that many long-term relationships, especially like business relationships with people. And so, I don't know, I feel like it's always a chance for me to get better at having that relationship. In the same way that I would, I can always be better in my relationship with my wife, God knows. But like with Dan, like I love our on-air rapport personally. I think that's why a lot of people listen. That's why people tune in. Oh, yeah. But I think that's why people listen more than twice. Otherwise it would be unbearable. But it's also that like it's been interesting for me to have this relationship with somebody as a colleague. Again, having not met him, it's super duper weird. But having a relationship on air, which is at this point probably the hugest part of the pie in terms of number of words exchanged between us. As you can understand, over 118 episodes that are usually an hour and a half long. I'm sure well over 90% of what we've said to each other is on that show. And then there's things we talk about. We text each other a lot, send each other pictures of our kids. He sends me way more presents than I send him, but he's a very gracious guy. And we talk about our lives. And some of that comes through on the show. But, like I say, it's a little meta, but that's been a great relationship for me. I hope it always stays cool and healthy. And I don't know. I mean, there will probably come a day when the show's not something we maybe mutually don't want to do anymore. But like, I really like doing it. And one completely afield thing that maybe I just want to say because I'm thinking about it. I'm hard on myself sometimes because I know I repeat myself. But, then I think about people who are doing like junkets to promote a movie, and they have to say the same thing over and over because it ends up being extremely self-involved to assume that everybody has heard what you have to say. What if instead you said, like, what's the best thing I can say today as though someone's never heard it? And on that show, I not very much, but just a little bit, I worry that there's like a certain amount of retreading. There's only so many things that can. I was watching, been watching 8.5 a little bit every night, the Fellini movie with the commentary on. I forget who said it, but somebody said there's really only like 3 stories that can be told. There's only so many things that we can say on that show. It's just that they need to be said and need to be heard and need to be reheard. I believe I need to re-say them so that I can rehear them. When I say ad nauseum that taking on more things than you can do is a road to frustration, or that being creative is about doing things repeatedly, without regard to whether you get a merit badge for it, and so forth. All of those things that like we talk about over and over. I need to say those because I need to hear them, but I'm becoming more comfortable with the fact that not everybody's going to listen to every episode of that show. It would be self-involved for me to assume that people do. And then I'm getting more okay with the fact that as much as some stuff may strike me as a retread sometimes, there's always a new spin on it. There's always new stuff to talk about with that. And there's always a reason to keep going back to the meetings. If you're in AA, I've had a bunch of friends in AA, and there's times where you need to go back to the meeting. And I would love to think that anytime somebody needs to come back to the meeting, they could pick up a copy of Getting Things Done and read through the first third of it just to kind of reboot. I would like to think that they could go to the gym and at least stretch a little bit, even if they don't run a marathon. And I would like to think that, like the Buddhist who comes to pick up the boat only when he or she needs to cross the river, I would like to think that even if you're not a weekly listener, there will be something there that you can come back and listen to. And so sometimes my friends will say, hey, I've kind of fallen out with the show, or I've, not fallen out, but I've kind of hadn't listened for a while, and now I don't know what you're talking about. And I'll be able to recommend an episode. I'll be able to say, go listen to the 5 Getting Things Done episodes, or go listen to this particular one. I as long as I'm completely full of myself, I think this week's episode is one of our best episodes. And I'm seeing people say that this is one of the episodes that would be great to start with, 118. So that's one thing that I've learned is that, if you teach a class, for example, like, would you feel like if you were trying to teach something, if I could be hoity-toity here, if you're trying to teach something about history or economics or mathematics, like if you're teaching a mathematics class, you shouldn't feel strange about having to explain multiplication more than once. In my case, that's much more abstract and much more discursive, but it'll never stop being important to me to share something that I want to get better at. And what works and doesn't work for me in doing that, and why I think yelling at you about this thing, it may make you mad, but it may make you think, and it may make you realize that you're a student too. And I like that.
That's great. Well, let's end on one last question here. I know that you choose not to look at tons of, productivity sites or whatever. I know you do look at Sven Fechter at Simplicity Bliss. What are some of the other, your priority? Like if you're going to, interact with somebody who's doing something similar, a similar student to you, what other students do you learn from? There you go. There's the question.
Oh boy, this is really awkward. You can cut this out. I don't read any productivity site all the time. I am forever unsubscribing and occasionally resubscribing. But I kind of don't want to name names, but there's probably a half a dozen sites and probably half a dozen podcasts that I will follow for a certain amount of time and then take a break from. Not because it's bad, but just because like I just need a break. It's not for me.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, I'm not getting a lot from it.
Yeah.
For example, I mean, I could not be more grateful to. There are a few people in the world I am more grateful to than Brett Terpstra because he's produced so much stuff that has fundamentally changed how I use my Mac. And cumulatively, for 2013, it's changed as much for me or more as Quicksilver did in 2004. I mean, I use things that Brett has made or contributed to so often that it's practically Brett Terpstra is my operating system. And so, for example, I follow Brett. I listen to his systematic show as often as I can, and I subscribe to his website. Well, I know what Brett Terpstra is doing. I don't need 10 links from 10 blogs to tell me that Brett Terpstra said something because I know what Brett Terpstra said. If I were going to single out one blog that I think gets it right because I think he's as frustrated about all this stuff as I am, it's Eddie Smith's site, Practically Efficient. I got that right, didn't I? Eddie
so.
J. Smith
Yeah,
IV.
I think so. Yep.
I don't remember the names of sites. I think it's Practically Efficient. He's so smart. He's such a nice guy. He's a genteel Southern man who I've had some nice conversations with. I think he gets it right. And maybe I think he gets it right because I feel simpatico with him because it seems to me that he's reached a point that I think everybody, I hope, will eventually reach with their productivity blog where he said, look, it just feels this way. He's not going to pump out a ton of stuff. He's going to go make stuff, And if that making stuff, one thing I'd love a lot, to end hopefully on a positive note, is that when I look at stuff like Mac Drifter or I look at stuff like, I'm so bad about this, guys. But I look at people who go from being somebody who likes Brett Terpstra to contributing to a Markdown project, something like the critic markup thing for doing proofreading. And I can never remember who's who. I get everybody confused, Federico and Sven and everybody. But I enjoy all those sites, but I enjoy those folks most when they have a post about something that they care a lot about. I don't need another link blog. I know what to look for. And it's not gratifying to me. This is just me today. Like, don't get all mad and butthurt, guys. But like, it doesn't benefit me to look at a blog that links to other stuff that much, especially when I'm going to find that link in 5 places. As soon as I find a site that is, and this is nothing, again, this is just me. Don't get mad. But as soon as I start following a site where it's mostly links to other blogs and sponsored posts, I need a break. Because I will find that somewhere else. I have ads. There's nothing wrong with that. But it just seems like every couple of days I open up RSS, I open up Google Reader for now, and it looks like I see 5 links to the same thing and 3 sponsored posts. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all need to promote ourselves and we all need to make money. But like, I just need breaks from that. But somebody like Brett, who's a friend. I mean, we're not super tight, but like, he knows how much I admire him. That's productivity, guys. Like Brett Terpstra works on the guts for a giant website, and he still finds the time to like be a foster parent with his lady for pit bulls, and to produce Marked, and to contribute to NV Alt, and to make. You want productivity? That's productivity. That's a guy who knows whereof he speaks because he posts about the stuff that he's succeeded with. He's posted a little bit about the stuff that succeeded in a way he didn't expect. And he constantly gives us little gifts all day long. Part of the reason I don't do 43 folders, one of the myriad reasons these days, is that I'm not sure what gifts I have to give there. If somebody considers what I give them on Back to Work to be a useful gift, I hope they'll consider that. I hope that's useful to somebody. But like just being a productivity blog that mostly points your attention in other directions has a short shelf life. It has a shelf life, but it doesn't have a long shelf life because it works at cross purposes with its basic reason for being. If it's just something you look at as your personal log, that will not bother you. But if you look at it for what it really is, which is a site that tries to earn you revenue by pointing people to different places, I wonder if you guys will eventually get to the same place I got to, which is hard and uncomfortable, which is that telling people how to manage their attention by sending them to different places is tough sometimes. But I like a bunch of them, and I look at them. I can't listen to every single episode of Mac Power Users, but I listen to a lot of those. I do tend to listen to podcasts, more than I read stuff. When I do read stuff in RSS, I mean, a lot of it is stuff that's a little bit more afield. I'm trying to think of examples, but that's what I really like. As far as like what I subscribe to, Mac Drifter. I'm on with the Mac Drifter right now. And when I want to listen to a podcast, for example, like if I'm going to listen to something, I mean, I really miss Hypercritical, John Syracuse's show, and I really miss Build and Analyze with Marco. I really miss the old talk show. I'm sorry, but I like the new one, but I love the old one. I know their relationship, John and Dan's relationship, was sometimes uneasy, but boy, do I miss that show. That is so entertaining to me. I could give a flying fig about what happens in the Apple universe. I'm so tired of hearing about it. Who cares? If you like your computer, use it, but why do you have to be so mad and right about computers? I just don't care. But I love to hear Dan and John talk about anything, whether that's Apple or James Bond. Yeah, I think I will eat my own dog food in one way. I come there for the topic, but I end up staying for the voice. So if you want to reach me, find a great voice, and then don't worry about whether I like it. That will make me love you, even if I don't read you.
Nice. Yeah, great way to end. Great way to end.
You're so patient, Eric, and you're so professional, and your voice is so lovely, especially for someone who works in academics.
All right. We can stop.
I appreciate you having me here.
No problem. Cool. Hey, it's been my pleasure. Again, one of the things that I wanted to do was have you on the show for a long time. You were on my initial list of however many people I listed out before I said, okay, I'm going to jump in and start doing this, and eventually got around to asking you. So
we'll put a very wide notch on your headboard because it's been great to be here.
Where can people find you? Where we want to send people to? Back to work?
I mean, the main place I put stuff back to work, which is at 5by5.tv, is pretty good. And the place that I end up posting a little more, and where like you wouldn't know it to look at it, I'm getting more of the itch to write a little bit, is on my weblog, Tumblr, Kung Fu Grip, which is it's grip with two P's and an E.
I will put the link in the show
notes. The flu. Yeah. But I'm in other places, but those are two good places. I need to update my website, and I honestly don't want you to follow me on Twitter. So those are two places where I wouldn't mind you going. I don't know. I don't need any more people asking me to explain what something meant.
Great. All right. Well, anyway, thank you so much. It's been, I mean, you did most of the talking, but I expected that to happen.
Did I?
Did you? That's the point.
Thank you, Eric.
People wouldn't ask you to come on their show if they didn't know that. There you go.
Well, okay, here's the thing. If you go to a buffet that's mostly fried food, don't complain that they don't have steamed okra. Here's the thing, Eric. Let me explain. No, that's the thing. Yeah, if you have me on, I'm going to talk a lot. And it's always, I said this to Marco. Marco and I were wanting to talk for a while. We hadn't caught up on the phone in a few weeks. And we were going back and forth on Twitter on, DMs about when we could talk. And I was like, well, I got to pick up my gun tour. Got to get my kid today at like 1. We could talk, have a quick call if you want. And he's like, we're not going to have a quick call. I was like, you know what? There's never anything that I've done for less than 90 minutes.
Well, this has been another episode of Beyond the To-Do List. Thanks again for listening, and thanks again to Merlin for stopping by. If this is your first episode, you can catch all the other interviews over at beyondthetodolist.com. You can subscribe easily there for iTunes or RSS feed or whatever your preferred method of subscribing is. And catch up on all the interviews that I've done with others regarding doing good work and how they do that and learning how to, adapt that to do better work yourself. Thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Beyond the To-Do List is a proud member of Noodle.mx Network at Noodle.mx. Find more great podcasts like How to Podcast, Clean Comedy, Once Upon a Time, Christian Worldview, and more at Noodle.mx. Think, laugh, and succeed by subscribing to our podcasts at Noodle.mx.